Warning, due to the nature of this series, this video will contain spoilers. You have been warned. Tim is off on a search to rescue the princess. She has been snatched by a horrible and evil monster. This happened because Tim made a mistake. I've been playing indie platformers for quite a while now. Some of them tell macabre stories about life and death. Others showcase beautiful visuals in order to tell the tale of Earth's creation. But one of the best indie platformers that I've ever seen is without a doubt, Braid. This is actually one of the first titles that I've played in this genre, and it not only challenged me with its unique puzzles, but it also granted me an extremely intelligent deconstruction on the platformer genre, and wove a fascinating tale of love, loss, and regret. So, with all of this in mind, let's rewind the clock and see just why Braid is one of the best games I've ever played. The environments in this game all have a very dreamscape-styled look to them. In fact, they all look like they take place on an oil painting. This style not only creates some extremely stunning set pieces, but it also lends itself to the plot. Tim is setting off on a grand adventure to save this princess. The way he goes about doing this is finding puzzle pieces which create a finished portrait and allow him to continue his quest. Until the canvas is completed, Tim is stuck in these worlds, supposedly reliving his past mistakes until he can move on. But there's more to these visuals than simply the environments. When you look at Tim, he doesn't have the standard presence of a knight in shining armor. He is dressed rather simply with a suit jacket, a tie, and khakis. He looks like the type of person that you would normally see in everyday life. This also lends heavily to the plot for multiple reasons, not the least of which is because the game deconstructs the entire hero mentality. But it also helps the player better relate to this character. Even the enemies are reminiscent of classic platformers, although these particular enemies look a bit uncanny and are potentially much more dangerous. The visuals of this game can create a soothing and beautiful journey into a valley, and they can convey chaos and destruction caused by the protagonist's self-proclaimed mistakes. But regardless of how you look at them, this is one stunning adventure from start to finish. The OST for this game is fascinating for two major reasons. Firstly, there are only 8 tracks throughout this entire game. Granted, this game isn't exactly long, but the fairly small OST is a very interesting choice from a design perspective, especially considering some of the tracks are repeated in the final world. What's also interesting is that the game's creator, Jonathan Blow, did not have people create music specifically for this game. All of the music was licensed tracks purchased from Magnatune.com. I find this absolutely incredible because all of these tracks perfectly match the setting and situation in which they are used. But even aside from this, these tracks are all composed beautifully and create a very dream or nightmare-like sound to each respective level. If the soundtrack can greatly enhance and validate the plot of a game for which it wasn't created, then that shows some seriously clever planning on the part of the developer. At its most base level, this game is extremely similar to other indie titles. In other words, this game is a platformer. However, unlike the majority of other platformers, this title is all about time manipulation. Tim can rewind time in order to reverse his death or to better plan out his moves in order to solve a puzzle. But as the game progresses, each chapter introduces a new element to the gameplay. For example, one chapter adds items and doors that are not affected by time manipulation, and in another, each action causes a shadow version of Tim, which can allow the player to be in 2 places at once. Each of these challenges heavily modifies the experience and manages to keep the players on their toes. But along with this, the constant gameplay changes manage to create some fantastic puzzles. The first time I played through this game, it did take me quite a while to figure out how to progress at certain points. But once I did manage to figure out these riddles, I felt very accomplished, as they typically required specific timing, planning, and an outside-the-box train of thought. When I first played this game, I thought it was just gonna be a straightforward fairy tale. Princess is kidnapped by a monster, man goes to rescue princess, man succeeds, everyone lives happily ever after. Once completing this game, however, I realized that this story was everything but. The first thing that tipped me off was the creatures encountered at the end of each chapter. They tell Tim that his princess is in another castle, much akin to Toad from Super Mario Bros. But at some point, they actually question whether or not this princess even exists. Furthermore, the story between the chapters indicates that Tim's original tale of what happened to the princess isn't exactly adding up. In fact, there's an indication that he may have even left another woman in pursuit of this princess. But just who is this princess? What happened to her? And why is Tim so persistent on saving her? Then, there's the order of the chapters. You begin in Chapter 2, make your way to Chapter 6, then the game concludes where it all began, in Chapter 1. This chapter sees Tim and the princess helping each other escape from a wall of flame while using Tim's time manipulation. Then, once it's all over and Tim can finally meet his princess, nothing. He can't interact with her, he can't greet her, kiss her, tell her that he's there to rescue her, nothing. What he can do is what he's been doing the entire time. Move time backwards. It's at this point that everything falls into perspective. All of those platforms that she moved in order to help Tim were really to try and stop him from getting to her. The evil knight at the beginning of the chapter was actually trying to save her from Tim. Tim is not the savior of this story. He is the monster. But there's even more to the plot than this. The epilogue implies that Tim has been using this time manipulation to change the past on multiple occasions, to seemingly no avail. Then, there's this line in the epilogue, which changes everything. After an especially fervent night of tinkering, he kneeled behind a bunker in the desert. He held a piece of welder's glass to his eyes and waited. On that moment hung eternity. Time stood still, space contracted to a pinpoint. It was as though the earth had opened and the skies split. One felt as though he had been privileged to witness the birth of the world. Someone near him said, "It worked." Someone else said, "Now we're all sons of bitches." Tim's enthusiasm and love towards his craft led to an amazing discovery. A discovery that changed the world. Unfortunately, this discovery also caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. He never meant for any of this to happen, and he constantly tries to undo his mistakes. But, despite his efforts, he can't. This tragic and extremely clever allegory blew my mind the first time I played this game, and the more I looked into the narrative, the more I saw elements which point to a deconstruction of standard video games, and I even feel like this story can be interpreted in many different ways depending on your point of view. But as for me, I feel like this is a beautiful story. A story which has had me reconsider how complex the platformer genre can become, and promotes a large amount of discussion, even to this day. While this was a very highly praised title, So high in fact that it's one of the highest rated games on the Xbox Live Arcade. Many people have had some issues with this game. So, to be fair, I'll go over some of the most common critiques that I've heard. Number 1. This game is too short. This is a fair argument. Even though each chapter implements a new gameplay element, and you need all puzzle pieces to progress, this game really won't take too long to complete once you figure out the core mechanics. Granted, there is a secret ending which can only be achieved with finding 7 secret stars, but this ending is so extremely hidden that very few people are aware it even exists. Not to mention, this ending didn't exactly explain much to me personally, but that's a different topic altogether. Yes, I would have preferred this game to be a little longer after paying $15, but given how much I ended up enjoying this game, I can overlook this issue. Number 2. The story doesn't make sense, or at the very least, it's overly complicated. Oh boy, you can say that again. Now, I feel like I have a pretty fair understanding of this storyline, but that was only after examining it multiple times, discussing with other gamers, and researching the significance of the quote at the end of the game. If one didn't quite make sense of this plot the first time around, I absolutely wouldn't blame them. In fact, if one were to argue that this story truly doesn't make sense, and people are just making their own interpretations of what they see as an allegory, I honestly can't say that they'd be wrong either. The creator has even said that he was incapable of explaining the plot in words, and that there are multiple ways to interpret the story. So, is this game about saving a princess? Is it a deconstruction of the gaming genre as a whole? Is it an allegory to the creation of the atomic bomb? Well, the way I see it, it's all of the above. I personally have my own theory as to how this storyline plays out, and some people may disagree with me, but that's perfectly okay. This is what I love about video games. Everyone has their own experiences, and we can all discuss how we played, felt, and interpreted whichever game is on the table. So yes, this storyline is very complex, and it could potentially turn off some gamers, but as for me, I feel like this made for one intriguing journey. And finally, number 3, this game is very pretentious. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this point because A, it is a very complicated matter, and B, it's really open to interpretation. But it's been brought up on many occasions, so I may as well give my thoughts on the matter. When looking at the painting-esque art style, the very complex storyline, and the references and deconstruction of other video games in the genre, it's very understandable how one would feel like this game takes a holier-than-thou attitude towards the medium. Heck, even looking at these elements can make one think that this game was made specifically to make the argument that video games are art. In fact, the creator Jonathan Blow has asserted that the game is about the journey and not the destination, and has on occasion asserted that people who didn't like the game just didn't understand it. So once again, if you were to get a feeling of pretentiousness, I wouldn't blame you at all. In fact, you may very well have a valid point. However, let me give my thoughts on game experiences. Video games are an extremely immersive medium. People from all walks of life can and will experience video games differently. I played through Braid and thought it was a clever platformer with an excellent storyline. Some people, however, disliked this game. Or maybe they disliked BioShock Infinite, Spec Ops: The Line, Chrono Trigger, or Metro 2033. But, like I've said, that's perfectly okay. Just because one dislikes a game doesn't mean they didn't get it. This is why I love this medium. We can all relate our personal experiences like I do with this show, and despite our disagreements, at the end of the day, we're all gamers, which is something that can never be taken away. Pretentiousness be damned. He cannot say he has understood all of this. Possibly he is more confused now than ever. But all of these moments he's contemplated, something has occurred. The moments feel substantial in his mind, like stones. Kneeling, reaching down toward the closest one, Running his hand across it, he finds it smooth and slightly cold. He tests the stone's weight. He finds he can lift it, and the others too. He can fit them together to create a foundation, an embankment, a castle. To build a castle of appropriate size, he will need a great many stones. But what he's got now feels like an acceptable start. What's done is done, and you can't change the past. Even your most minor of mistakes may come back to haunt you in time, and you might wish that you could go back and do things all over again. But you can't. However, what you can do is pick up the pieces of your life and rebuild. It's this beautiful message that allows me to say that Braid is one of the best games I've ever played.